Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Raymond. I founded Learn for Life Test Prep to help students master US college admissions exams. And I founded this so that we could work with students' brains' natural learning processes instead of against them. So before we dive in to today's information, I'd love to know who's here with us today. Type in the chat where you're joining from and what grade your student's in. I want to hear where everyone's coming in from. Oh, cool. Blowing up. We got some Hong Kong, Mumbai, bunch of people in India. That's amazing. Great to see you. More Hong Kong. Excellent. Singapore. Cool. New York. Welcome. San Francisco, San Jose. That's early. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Excellent. Oh, grades. We got some excellent grades. We got another one from Hong Kong. Cool. Ninth grade. Ninth grade, that's early. Thanks for joining. That's awesome. Well done. 10th, 11th, 11th, 11th. Excellent. 10th. This is great. India. Oh, awesome. Thank you guys. Okay, so just a quick bit about my background. I spent the last 15 years helping students transform their test taking abilities. And in this time, I've developed just a completely different approach to test prep. It's not about endless drills or memorization. And with this approach, I've guided students from initial scores in the mid 20s, sometimes lower than 20, to achieving 34 plus on something like the ACT. Those are scored on 36, and similar transformations on the SAT, which is scored on 1600, like getting people from 1220, 1250 all the way up to above 1550 to 1600. But what really drives me, what motivates me, is seeing how this approach doesn't just improve test scores, but it fundamentally changes how students learn and process information across all their academic work. And then beyond the academic work, it fundamentally changes how they interact with the world in a positive way. So I'm just going to take a brief moment right now for those of you unfamiliar with who I am or my background to share why I'm so passionate about this brain-based approach. So years ago, as I was working in test prep, I also began working with another company called Organizational Tutors, who brought me in as an executive functioning coach. And I began helping students who were incredibly bright, but were struggling to show their true abilities on tests and assignments. Their teachers were saying that they weren't putting, but I would say that was untrue. And I noticed something fascinating. These students weren't lacking knowledge or effort. Their brains were simply processing information significantly differently from many of their classmates, who also, big secret, process information differently. Just the differences are only very slight. For example, I had one student, let's call him Michael, okay? He could brilliantly explain complex physics concepts, but he takes an exam, total freeze, just freeze up on exams. I had another student who would write amazing creative stories, just mind-blowing. But when it came time to reading comprehension, timed, just struggled, could not make it through. So working with these diverse learning profiles, it taught me something crucial, okay? Traditional test prep wasn't failing because students weren't trying hard enough. And I know this because I was applying traditional test prep. It was failing because it ignored how our brains naturally process information. So this got me thinking. And this realization led me to develop the Answer GPS framework, which works with your brain's natural patterns instead of against them. And not only that, but it's a transferable life skill, so students could practice this beyond just preparing for the test. And I've since helped students with ADHD, anxiety, dyslexia, and various learning styles achieve scores they never thought possible. And it's not by making them study harder, but by teaching them to work smarter with their brain's natural strengths. All right, so I'd love type brain in the chat, okay? If you've ever suspected, there must be a better way than just endless drills, right? And feel free to throw in some questions while we're at it. Oh, okay. So Got a question already. Can you explain more about how different learning styles affect test performance? Okay, that's a great question. And what I've discovered is that traditional test prep assumes that everyone's brain kind of works the same, unless it's drastically different. Okay, but each brain works on its own frequency, what we call neurodivergent, neurotypical, right? Neurotypical does not mean everyone works the same way. It's still slight variations between each person, okay? So like, think about your evening routine, for example. Everyone has their own unique sequence, and it's automated. We usually don't even think about it. Some people, they're just like, I need to go to the gym. Others are like, I'm going to check social media. And that's what you do, decompress, whatever it is. You figured out a way that your brain automates for you to enter into evening mode, okay? And the same applies to processing test questions. A student with ADHD might need a completely different approach than a student with anxiety. And throwing multiple strategies at this, just like, here, memorize this, memorize that, that just adds confusion. And that's why Answer GPS framework is adaptable. It works with your child's natural thinking patterns instead of forcing them into this like one size fits all approach. Got another question from Victoria. Excellent. My son is a sophomore. Is it too early to start thinking about this? Love it. Okay. So actually, it's a great question. Sophomore year is an ideal time to lay this groundwork. Why? Good question. We are talking about developing new neural pathways. This takes time, okay? You want them to develop strongly, and you have to dismantle old pathways while you build new ones. So if you start early, that means we can build these patterns without having like a huge ton of pressure of the junior year deadlines. It allows for a natural growth of the brain to process information differently. Plus, it gives us the flexibility to target these really advantageous test dates that I'm going to be talking about just about now. Okay. So today we're going to cover something that might completely change how you think about timing this test prep journey. All right. So what if I told you something crazy? What if I told you that December is actually the best time for your child to take these tests? There are a few other great times, but right now, this is an excellent time to go. Okay, it's not spring of 11th grade like everyone says, or even the fall of 12th, where sometimes it falls into, you know? I know this might sound like totally counterintuitive, maybe even crazy, but let me ask you a question. What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? Think about that. Okay, you probably check your phone, walk to the bathroom, start the coffee. And here's the thing. You probably don't think about doing any of that. And that's not because of like some sort of laziness or lack of effort. It's just how your brain saves energy. It takes these repeated actions and it automates them into sequences. These neural patterns are firing so reliably that you don't have to think about them anymore. I, for one, have been training my brain, it's really hard, to not turn on my phone until after I finish breakfast and after I finish getting ready for the morning. This is so hard. This is not an easy thing. After years of being like, wake up, turn on my phone, see what's going on. I'm like, no, not going to do it. Going to go straight through. And it's great. I love doing it, but it's hard work. Now, imagine if your child's brain did the same thing, but for test taking. Okay? So that's what's happening when we train strategically and consistently. We're not just studying, we're building a test taking reflex. So our brains are filled with all these neural pathways. And it's all about the electrical firing that happens between them. And the electrical firing is going to take the most strategic approach, the fastest way to get from one point to another. And if we train those pathways, then we can maximize the potential of our brain. And so this is why most students get it wrong. They try to build these patterns during the most stressful time of their academic year. And usually, honestly, it's not even about building patterns for most people. It's really just about cramming. So that's like trying to learn a new morning routine while running late for your meetings. So like one step at a time, get better at one thing, then move on to the next thing. That's what we call the growth edge mindset. See where you are now, where you've been, and where you could be next, not where you want to go at the end. Okay, so type stress in the chat if you've seen your child overwhelmed trying to balance test prep with everything else, or just in general having a tough time really balancing all the demands that their rigorous schedules require. All right, got some more questions here. So I've heard practice makes perfect. Yes, but you're saying, I'm saying, timing matters more than just doing lots of practice tests. That's a good question. Okay, think about it this way. It's not just about how much you're going to practice, but when and how you practice. If you're trying to build these new neural pathways while you're also juggling AP exams, sports championships, college visits, your brain goes into survival mode. What is survival mode? Survival mode is the embedded pathways that you've already established. Those may have gotten you to survive, to succeed even, but they might be not doing it in the most efficient way. So that's why strategic timing combined with this right approach is so crucial. All right. I hope that answers your question. Got some people chatting stress in the chat. Okay. How long does it typically take to build these test-taking reflexes you mentioned? That is a really good question. It takes time. More than a couple weeks, more than a couple months. And this is exactly why December is the best time to take these tests. Not spring of junior year when you're doing all this other stuff and you don't have time to embed new neural pathways. All right. What happens is when we are working now, you can start practicing with purpose. So everything that we do in test prep can be applied to schoolwork. That way, you're really reinforcing these new neural pathways to become automated behaviors. That's what we're looking to do, okay? And here's what most people do. They wait until the winter of junior year when their child is overwhelmed with AP classes, sports, exams, extracurriculars. Then they cram test prep into an already packed schedule. It's like just piling it on, right? And this rush to get ready for the spring, summer tests, and often like just pushes the retests into the fall of 12th grade. So sometimes they're just not even ready for the spring and summer after they've been prepping, and you push it all into the fall. Because what happens is that you want to look at this schedule to really identify where tests are taking place. And in the fall, you're already working on college exams, so you really want to be done with the test by this point. I'd love to see anyone type busy in the chat if this sounds familiar to you. All right. We got some more questions. Why wouldn't spring testing dates be better since students have learned? I love this engagement. Thanks, guys. So why wouldn't spring testing dates be better since students have learned more material by then? Okay, got some busy in there. This is really one of the biggest misconceptions in the test prep journey. These tests aren't actually about how much content you know, right? They're about, well, it's not about new content. This content goes all the way back to like 4th grade. So you know it. You know 90%. And it's really about how you can process the information that you know, that you can master, and make decisions based on this. So by December, you've already covered 90 to 95%, probably more, of all of the relevant content that you need for this test. And we can fill in the gaps for anything else. So what they need isn't really more knowledge. It's a mastery of what they know and the right mental framework for applying what they already know. So those two things combined is what really works there. What about students? Got another question here from Jane. What about students who are involved in sports? How does this December timeline work for them? Okay. Thank you, Jane. That is an excellent question. What we want to talk about with the sports timeline is, again, if you learn to train your brain as you go, then when the fall sports come around, and if we started in sometime like the end of June, beginning of July, you're already starting to embed and implant these new neural pathways that you've been practicing, and you can start applying them to school, which actually helps relieve the school pressure and the test pressure while doing fall sports. So this is a really good way to manage that, is starting actually ahead of the school year. So when you get into the school year, you're already running strong. Now, some calendars, like in India, for example, they're already starting in July. Great. Let's start in the end of June, beginning of July, in synchrony with the school schedule. Okay. If we take a look at this calendar here, we can see what's going on with the SAT and ACT, the two tests that you could take. So we have this cycle here. If you look at the December test date here, this is an optimal time. There's a big gap here. Look at the SAT. The SAT is highly concentrated in this area and a little bit in this area, but really mostly here. The ACT is pretty evenly spread out throughout the year. That creates something interesting. So this is what's really fascinating, is that the test makers actually designed this timing. Okay, so keep this in mind. The tests in the U.S., these U.S. college admissions exams, are not administered by an overarching education department. They're administered by either the College Board, which runs the SAT, or the ACT, which runs the ACT. And they're both equally accepted by all colleges. And it's something that you want to decide for yourself which one is the best test to have your student get the best scores. This is something I offer as diagnostic tests to allow us to see what the starting point is. All right. So these test dates are deliberately targeting particular people. They're done for a reason. So these happen to be juniors who are probably stressed out, and seniors, okay, who are applying for college. This is like the traditional thought process. But the secret advantage that most people are missing is that this test date here, who's taking that? Who's taking the December test? Not that many people are going to take it. So you have lower competition, you have less crowded test centers, you have less pressure, and you have better scoring. Because the way the curve of the scores, which I'll talk about in a second, is related to related performance. And then you have perfect timing for super scoring, because super scoring is a way that you can compound your best scores over time, compile them, send those results. Okay? So that is an excellent way to go. And I want to show you exactly how this works for optimal scores. Okay? So the first thing that you want to consider is, if you are taking if you're planning the approach that many people do, where it's like 75 hours of test prep, 2 to 5 hours of sessions per week with 5 hours of homework and multiple practice tests within a 3-month period, what's going to happen is you're going to have a graph like this, where you have you have time down here, you have scores here. Okay. What's going to happen is you're going to have it's going to go up, but then it's going to go down, up, down, up, down, up. Maybe it's an upward trend, but you never know what's going to happen at the end. Okay. Now, in this brain-based approach that takes strategic planning in mind, what happens is you have this graph, same graph, right? You have time, you have scores. But what happens here is we have a slow upward trend in the beginning, nice steady curve, then big progress, and then we plateau at the maximum score. Okay, so here we're still doing practice tests. Here is the official test. You see that? This is the same score that you're getting practice tests to the official test. You walk into test day, boom, you know you're going to get that score. If you look at this graph, who knows what you're going to get? You might get close, but we're not talking about close. We don't want close. We want the score that you want to get. Top 1%. That's what we're talking about, right? We want the elite colleges, top schools. Okay? So this gets into how scores are actually measured. So the scoring system is actually designed like it's measured on a standard bell curve with normal distribution. So if we take a look at this, we say, okay, these are scores down here. Here's our scores. And here are the number of students. Okay? Number of students, scores. Okay? So we have this situation going on here. And over here is our max. Over here is the max. So for the SAT, we're talking, we got 1600. For the ACT, we have 36. All right. Now, what happens is that we have a bell curve like this. Okay. Standard, we have normal distribution. These have particular deviations. And so over here is a very small percentage of people who can fit here. Okay. They want the scores to be here. This is supposed to be the mean or the average, the median, and the mode, the most frequently occurring test score, is supposed to be right here. The most number of students at this score. Okay. They distribute the scores, the raw scores, across this to create the scale. Now, what happens is that when nobody's telling you about this, right, is that these scores follow this curve, the scale. That's what the scale is. Okay. So you don't have to necessarily get a perfect score to get a perfect score. That's the key here. You can miss questions and still get a 1600. You can miss questions and still get a 36. Because if you're getting the top raw score, you're going to sit over here. Okay. So in December, who's taking those tests? You're competing against fewer high-performing students, which means there are more people making more errors. So the more correct your answers are, the more easily you fit into this section right here, the high scores. Okay? That means there's more room to fit you into the top scores, better chance of getting those top scores. All right? I'd love to see an aha if this is making sense. Type that into the chat. And I got some questions. All right, great. Can you explain more about how the scoring curves work differently in December? Okay, great. Thank you, Rakesh. Can you explain more how the curves? Okay, so the scoring curve is kind of fascinating because it's all about who you're competing against. It is a performative grade, it's not about you. So in the spring, you're up against all of the juniors in your country around the world. Okay, they're all been prepping, they're all ready to go. But December, you're mainly competing with a few well-prepared students who are following a strategic timeline, but the bulk of the people are people who are like, oh, I got to take this test before I apply for regular admission, right? That's the difference. There are no seniors taking the December test who are applying early. Who's applying early? The really high competitive students, the really high performing students. If you're applying regular decision, you've either already applied early, in which case you probably already got your test score. So really think about who's taking this test. Who's this for? In the US, it's often for the people who are like, oh my God, I forgot I got to take this test before I apply for college in regular admission. So that's something to really think about. Okay. And then when you're talking about this in terms of super scoring, you can combine your best sections from different test dates. So that's why this timeline works out really well, because you have backup dates. So if you look at this timeline again here, you can have a soft target with either the October or the November test, a hard target with the December test, and then for the ACT, it's really great because you have the February test as in your back pocket. So somebody else asked, can you, let me check this question. I've heard of super scoring. Okay, great. Can you break down exactly how that works? Yes. Okay, so super scoring works like this. Let's say you in November you score a 790 in math, but you scored a 710 in reading and writing. Okay, this is in November. And then in December, you take it again and you score a 780 in math, but you score a 780 in reading and writing. So what you can do is, I honestly would have you take it a third time because these are too close to 800 for you to not try to get 800. But let's say that's it. You're like, I'm done. I'm satisfied with these scores. Then you can take this one and you can combine it with this one for your full score. So here you would get a 1570, okay, instead of the other scores that you would get here. All right. So that's what you want to look at with these scores, is really consider how you can super score. With the ACT, you have actually kind of a sneaky advantage because those are average scores. So with these average scores, you're going to get decimal sometimes. So let's say you have some high scores up to 36, right? But you got a 34 on your overall score. Now, you really only need a 34.5 to bump up to a 35, or a 35.5 would give you a 36. So if you strategically map out these tests, then you can take advantage of this super scoring to really max out that score. And that's how I get students, I've had students who take the test in December, they prepped, they're ready to go, 34 December. They're like, I'm done. This is awesome. I'm totally done. I would say, no, you're not. If you got a 34, you can get a 36. That's what that means. So take it again in February. Oh, I don't want to take it again. Well, we're going to do it. All you have to do is a bunch of practice tests in that time. That's it. We don't really need that many sessions. So we take that, and then she takes the test in February. Boom, she gets a 35. Gets her in early to Brown. That's the way we're going to do this, okay? And this is why I use a system called Answer GPS framework. I designed this system to help my students. It's just like a GPS helps you navigate any road condition, get you from one place to another. This system helps students navigate any question type with one consistent approach. And the optimal ACT timeline for mastering content like this and this real life method is to go back over here to our timeline. It's really to start around this time right here. Okay. This is where we start content mastery. And then here is where we start developing the Answer GPS training. We get from here to here, we're doing practice tests. By the time you sit into the real test, you're so used to it that it feels like, oh yeah, this is just what I do. So this isn't just about timing, it's about working with your brain's natural learning process. And then students are done with the test by December of 11th grade or earlier. And they're free to utilize what they've learned in test prep to increase their 11th grade performance, really maximizing it. So they end the year with the best grades possible because they already hit their goal score months earlier while everyone else is cramming for this. All right, great. I got some questions. This makes so much sense. My daughter struggles with test anxiety. Would this approach help with this? Yes. We build in mindfulness exercises that then become embedded neural pathways to help reduce test anxiety. Automating behavioral responses to make this effortless. Okay, could you share an example of how this worked for one of your students? Yes. I have a student who was just maxing out, could not answer the number of test questions within the amount of time. So his
maximum number of questions was a 43 on 60 in math. Okay. To get the best score possible meant that he had to use Answer GPS, and it meant that he then got every question right. And this was a particular case because he had to take the test in standard time, even though he was granted accommodations. So with accommodations, he could have done much better. That was his particular situation, but we maxed it out. And his goal was a 26. He got a 26 in math because that's what he needed for his particular application. He got that. But then when he took it with extended time, boom, he got a 34. Before we wrap up and I tell you about the Answer GPS workshop, I just want to take some questions. All right. Great. So what's the first step for parents who want to get started with this approach? Love that question. So the best first step to understanding exactly where your child stands and which test best matches their thinking style is to take a diagnostic test of both the ACT and the SAT. Right? Full tests. But even more importantly, I'm going to be hosting the Answer GPS workshop in a couple weeks in June, where I'll break down exactly how to implement this framework step by step and what you can do going forward. All right, how does the Answer GPS workshop help build these skills? Well, it helps you see that you can just do one particular methodology for every single question on the test, whether it's math, science, reading, or English. And then you can also decipher any instruction that's given to you by any teacher in their particular style of articulation. All right, so if you're ready to help your child navigate these tests with confidence, I'm going to be hosting this special Answer GPS workshop in June. Type GPS in the chat to save your spot. I'd love to see you there. Cool. Seeing a bunch of GPS float. That's awesome. Thank you, guys. That's great. Okay, because here's the truth. This isn't just about test scores. Of course, those are important. We want to get the highest scores possible, but it's about giving your child the framework they'll use for the rest of their academic career. All right, great. Thanks for joining. I'm so happy you were here, and I look forward to seeing you at the next info session, and then finally at the Answer GPS workshop. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Let's have an excellent day.